What's that? No, two camera. This camera. Okay, are you ready? And hold on.
Hi, I'm Maryam Heinen, an investigative journalist, a functional medicine consultant, best known for directing the film Vanishing of the Bees. And I have the pleasure today to sit with Sayer G, who is the founder of GreenMedInfo and an author, and Zach Vorhies, Google whistleblower and software engineer for the past 8.5 years for Google and YouTube. And we're here today to discuss the decimation that has occurred in the health freedom space, people who stand for health freedom to empower you to be your own best health advocate. So if you can take it away and explain your experience.
So GreenMedInfo actually was founded in the context of a pretty massive, if you will, censorship of evidence-based natural medicine. So I sort of already anticipated at some point we would face the type of deplatforming that happened for us really in May of this year, when suddenly MailChimp, our primary email provider, just shut down our account, and they stated that it was for anti-vaccine content. You know, a Lancet study, showing some unintended adverse effect of vaccination is considered anti-vaccine, whereas it's actually pro-vaccine awareness. It's actually shedding light through the peer-reviewed research on what vaccines may do in some cases. So it seemed a really political move, and their terms of use, which we never violated for 10 years, didn't have anything related to that topic. So it was clearly a sudden shift where they were just basically trying to prohibit our ability to send free messages to those who opt to get our message. It was discovered soon after that they are CDC Foundation partners, which means that ultimately they collude with a nonprofit extension off the CDC in such a way that the platform itself is under the control of the CDC, and the message has to, adhere to the one narrative that vaccines are safe and effective unequivocally. So that was the beginning, but then of course the Google update hit in early June, and then our SEO traffic was completely eliminated. And so for us, it wasn't a huge shock because we're newsletter driven, but it was enough to make me aware that there was something really going on, that this was a probably intentional attack on those individuals and groups that are trying to bring awareness to alternative health information. Without information, you can't really make a choice when it comes to these medical decisions with life or death consequences. So if Google is presenting the image of objectivity, through algorithmic processes, and it's really not, there's a sort of publishing aspect or there's a censorship, then that interferes with basic human rights at this point as far as medical ethical principles. So that's why I was really excited that you brought us together, because I think as an insider, Zach can shed light that none of us, can access on the topic.
I think it all comes down to an authoritative score. This was something that YouTube and Google started pushing in 2017 because, what they said is that they were combating fake news and fake information that was out there on the internet. And so they went from a position of organize the world's information and make it universally accessible to we need to start ranking websites based upon some hidden score called the authoritativeness score. When I first learned about this in 2016, I was like, is this really what's going on? And then I started searching within Google's internal documents that were available to all full-time employees, and I went, oh yeah, and then they gave an example, and right at the top of the list was the Wall Street Journal. In the middle was Fox News, and then at the bottom was Breitbart, right? And so when people do searches and they see, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, MSNBC, at the top, and they're wondering why is this happening, it's because of this authoritativeness score. And so the question is, well, if this authoritativeness score exists for the news organizations, are there other places where this is being utilized? And what's been really clear is that in 2019 especially, there was a ramp up in the rhetoric against people that were vaccine skeptic. They were being demonized. And what Self-Hacked reported very recently was that all alternative or independent health articles were being deranked. It was like a 90, 95, in some cases with Mercola, it was a 99% drop, right? Where there was like almost 2 million unique views a month, I think, for Mercola, and then it dropped down to like less than, somewhere around 10,000. I can't remember the exact number. And so the question that, when I see this pattern, I think to myself, well, this looks like the authoritativeness score, being applied across the health industry. And it feels like to me that Google is certainly funneling people towards these, big pharma sponsored websites. And, as someone who's investigated this a lot, like I've dramatically seen an increase in my own health just because I've been able to do the deep dive research and be like, oh, wow, if I take this, then I'm going to feel better. And I found out that for myself, I was actually vitamin B9 deficient. That was causing a whole cascade of health problems, including chronic migraines. And figuring out that I needed methylfolate completely changed my life. But you won't ever see this in the established medical articles that are coming out right now, and it's really sad. So yeah, I think that the reason why this is happening right now is that Google is assigning authoritativeness to the big pharma articles, and they're assigning sort of a trashy fake news label to anything else that opposes that.
Can you talk about how Wikipedia is kind of Google's sidekick?
There was this thing that happened in California where the Republican Party had its ideology listed on Google as Nazi ideology. This Nazi ideology was in the Wikipedia article. So they ingested that bad data and it got put into the results as truth. Wow. And when this bug was filed, like, what's going on? This is an outrage, right? And the answer from the engineers is like, oh, we're taking in the ideology tag and we thought that it was trustworthy, but obviously it's being vandalized. And so the response was to eliminate the ideology tag for all Wikipedia articles. And so the question is, well, what exactly is happening? Wikipedia started off as this open access encyclopedia of knowledge. And then what happened was they started cutting off people from being able to access it.
So here we have Wikipedia that has unvetted, they're anonymous writers that are taking precedence over accredited professionals such as you and me who are sourcing our stories properly.
Well, this brings up one of the amazing things that you've helped to reveal to the world, which is in your Google document release, there was a slide that showed that they were ranking, associations between, say, vaccine and autism alongside flat Earth and Holocaust denial. And I found that to be really profound.
Oh yeah, the fringe queries. Yeah, they were saying, oh, these were fringe. And they don't want to
It wasn't, you mean it wasn't on the side of complete blacklisting?
They weren't saying it was fake, they were saying it as fringe, as if it was something, and it's not true. Like, there's a lot of those things that are not fringe. People want to know whether vaccines are safe. Right. And the problem is that they can't find the answer because there hasn't been any safety studies that have been done. They've never taken a kid and asked the question, hey, is giving them 60 vaccines through their life safe? And when people told me this, I was like, no, that can't be true. And then I researched it and I was like, oh my God, they've never done any safety studies on this thing.
Well, there's never been a saline placebo controlled trial study comparing, basically a real placebo versus a vaccine. But one thing that came up in my own search following this fallout with Google was that if you look at the auto completion suggestions, right? Even in their blog on the topic, they're saying it's not a suggestion. It's based on some type of algorithm looking at real search data. You type in vaccines cause, and what comes up as their suggestion first is adults. It was just like this PSYOP campaign that's probably pharma design to offset the real search volume, which is vaccines. Do they cause autism, for example? So you go to another Google product, which is Google Trends, and you see this, no one searches for
Yeah, no one searches for it.
So they're actually literally putting into the mind, it's like neuro-linguistic programming, thoughts that no one has on the planet that affect millions of searchers at their moment of vulnerability, which is why they go to Google. They're like, well, what's going on? They search and, oh, vaccines cause adults. You know, so I just wanted to ask you about that. Like,
how does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, so, Google has stated that these auto search suggestions are being created by the aggregate of user data, but let's just call it a data lake. Okay, so there's this data lake and it's producing these results. What's happening is that data lake is being poisoned. So people are like, well, why is Google poisoning the data lakes? That's actually the wrong question to ask. The question is, who has access to being able to poison these data lakes? And that's a very interesting question, because the answer is that it turns out that a lot of people have access to poison these data lakes. What's happening is that Google has given access to change the results on its search page. And what they've done is that they've given this link called Report Inappropriate Results. You can see it right at the bottom right-hand corner of the search results. So, when someone types in like vaccine causes, an increase in the incidence of type 1 diabetes, right? Big Pharma is, I believe, a theory that I have is that Big Pharma is creating a campaign, and there's a swarm of people going in and deleting references to these results. And what they're doing is that they're vandalizing the data lakes, and Google's allowing them to do this because, well, we can make theories all day about why that's going on, but.
So it's a vulnerability they haven't shut down for this reason, because it allows them to be
It allows them to clean their hands. And I've seen this pattern being applied over and over and over again, where they intentionally leave a vulnerability open so that the results can be vandalized, and they are able to claim plausible deniability.
Well, because in Bing, they have a similar system, and they're programming in searches, anti-vaxxers are killers, like literally. And it's almost part of a psyops that you see in the mainstream media, where they're trying to characterize those who question vaccine safety. A lot of them are just mothers of damaged children, right? Yes. As if they're violent, irrational, militant, crazy people.
I'd like to say a couple of things. One, that there used to be organic searches, and that now these auto suggestions, Zach majored in psychology, I minored in psychology.
Me too. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. So that it's a proven mind control tool that works on our subconscious, and that even in the past couple of weeks, that when you put in, which I think is in the story I wrote for GreenMedInfo, supplements are, all these negative things come in, but now they've peppered in some positive things, which just shows how maniacal and premeditated it is. And then as far as the vaccines, denying the fact that there's a court, because these pharmaceuticals have impunity, they can't be sued. How about the $4 billion in the court of damaged children? And also, if you are vaccinated, what are you worried about? You're the inoculated ones, right?
Yeah, it's a very powerful point. I would say that, what the biggest thing that has blown my mind is the fact that this search engine manipulation effect that this Professor Epstein uncovered, he determined that it may be the most powerful effect in human behavior ever identified, and that it likely determined a quarter of the world's elections in recent times. So you just brought to the surface this, is it this algorithmic fairness? If you could
machine learning fairness.
Yes.
So the question of what exactly is machine learning fairness? Machine learning fairness is you have a bunch of really complex data, like let's say articles, and then that you would read in a magazine, and then you're assigning it certain types of attributes, like right wing or health or fake news or true, right? And so you have this, you take all this data, let's say tens of thousands of articles, half of them are true, half of them are false, and you feed it through this machine learning system, and it's going to try to figure out what the patterns are, right? And so, if a machine learning algorithm, comes through and every single time an article has flat Earth and it's been labeled as false, then it's going to say, aha, the trick is every single time I see flat Earth, I'm going to know that the article is false, right? That's the simplest example of what machine learning is. It gets way more complex than that, but let's just build off that foundation. Machine learning fairness is a technique that Google is using in order to say we're going to rebias the internet, because what they need to do is they need to classify the information that's on the internet. So if you make a blog post, they're going to run a classifier. That classifier is a machine learning algorithm. When they push it up or down, what they're applying is quote unquote fairness. So they've come up with this Orwellian term, machine learning fairness, which describes how they're going to censor the internet. And the thing is that that's the way that they would call it, right? They're not going to call it like something that would invoke fear. They would call it something that you wouldn't naturally be against, because who would be against fairness, right? But in reality, it's a Trojan horse. And the machine learning fairness is the way that they are, making the internet actually unfair.
Machine learning unfairness.
Yeah, that's what's really machine learning unfairness.
Well, I think for me, the big reveal and shock was knowing that there isn't a lot of objective, algorithmic processing going on, that there's so much programmed bias, and even being targeted as a brand. I have an advisor in this realm who has a little bit of insider information as well, who has pointed out, based on the link attributes and the context historically, that we were targeted manually, and that's probably how it's done on some level. Certain brands, Mercola, Josh Axe, just completely wiped off the map because of a human decision.
Before machine learning fairness kicked into high gear, they were doing censorship the old-fashioned way, which was to create blacklists. And Google was saying publicly and under oath, we don't have blacklists, we don't have blacklists. And I was sitting there at YouTube and I was like, whoa, we don't have blacklists? Really? We don't have blacklists? So I did a search for blacklists, and I literally found the blacklist files that were named blacklist. Okay, that's how brazen they were with their deception to the American people and to their under oath testimony. But the thing is that they started getting heat for these blacklists. They did this internal message where they're like, actually blacklist is racist, so they renamed them to exclusion lists.
Wow.
And then machine learning fairness started to come in, and essentially what they're doing with machine learning fairness is that they're hiding the blacklist within it, because unlike a regular algorithm that's written in Python or C++, one of these other programming languages, when it's written in those languages, I could analyze it line by line and be like, oh, I get an idea of what's going on, and I could tell you what's happening. With machine learning, you have no idea what's going on. Even an expert can't figure out what's going, because it's just a bunch of neural nets that are simulating brain neurons. And so it's just it's a convoluted network of nodes that have weights, that have signals going here, and it produces an output that's between 0 and 1 of whatever it's classifying. Yeah. And so even if you were to subpoena them in court and get the details of their neural network, you would still have no idea on what it does.
Well, it's sort of like, childhood's end in a way, like this assumption that we could play by the rules, right? And there's Google, Facebook, big tech has given everyone this free lunch, trillions of free referral visits for many years. So a lot of us just assumed we are entitled to it. Yes. But from the beginning, and if you go deep into obviously the origin of these companies and the internet, you go to DARPA, you start to really see the darker history. I would say the cascade you observed from 2016 on, there was collusion at the highest level in the Podesta and the DNC and Hillary email leaks with Eric Schmidt, right, colluding to basically put Hillary in office. Yes. And that leaking, I think, destroyed that
plan. Can you talk about
so
that?
I was hoping
all I know is what's been released to the public, which is that Eric Schmidt had an email talking about how he was going to help the Clinton Foundation win the presidency. And that's about the extent of what I know about Eric Schmidt.
But needless to say, election politics and 2020 figure into what we're seeing potentially now in terms of them trying to manipulate.
I mean, they're trying to, I mean, this is what I believe. I believe that Google's trying to do a test run. They're trying to see what they can get away with before the public pushes back. And I think, I mean, the reason why I resigned was because I did not feel comfortable working at a company that was clearly engaging in election interference in the United States and abroad, and was engaging in health censorship and engaging in censorship of all these other different voices. And so I felt like if I had more bravery, that I would step forward, and every day I would look in the mirror with sort of like disgust, because I was like, I'm part of this evil system. I'm taking money from it in order to live a really comfortable, great life, you know, live in a really great area, eat really great food. And there's these people that are suffering because they can't find adequate health information, because Google's standing in between them and the data they're trying to access and acting as an unelected gatekeeper.
I think that that is in human nature, that a lot of people are wanting to put food on their table and not taking the courage to speak their truth because of the convenience, and that a lot of people are also, that I've spoken to, consciously choosing convenience over privacy. And if you stand for health freedom, I mean, what are we without our health?
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing today in this country is that the mandate of medical interventions, which carry great risk, disability, death, right? That is coming to literally our doorstep. And so now it's harder to justify the concept of comfort or versus freedom, because it's a big deal when someone penetrates your body against your will, and when the consequences of that, the liability has been deleted because of the government underwriting risk. So yeah, I think what you've done is extremely courageous, and I think it's clearly his higher self that produced that guilt you felt. But ultimately, I mean, it's huge what you've done. So I mean, I'm excited to even be part of helping to get the word out so that more people can follow you, and as well, obviously your work too with the honeybee colony. This is huge. So it's extraordinary to be among you for that reason.
Sarah, tell me about your experiences. Like, have you felt the sting of censorship?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really affected me even on a personal level, because when I was taken off of my platform for communication, my mission was always to disseminate as widely as possible the evidence that already exists supporting natural medicine in the peer-reviewed literature. And when they started to interfere, I started to feel targeted, And of course, if you look at what's happening with the World Health Organization and the messaging, that non-participation in a unnecessary medical intervention that carries the risk of death, including your own children, is reason to define you as a threat, almost like we're bioterrorist vectors if we don't vaccinate. Everything's so inverted at this point that, look at the latest Gallup poll. The pharmaceutical industry of 25 industries polled is the least trustworthy, below the government.
It's one of the most hated industries.
But they're the primary funder of the media. So it's like people are consuming this garbage, they know who's behind it, and yet they do know inside that is completely an Orwellian, farce what's happening.
Question, are you anti-vax, Sayer?
Yeah, great question, because when you spoke to choice, that is the critical, existential, ethical, ontological ingredient in this whole debate, which is that I totally support someone's right to vaccinate, if that is what they choose, as well as if they do not choose. And if you take choice out of the equation, then you can't have informed consent. And that directly violates the most basic medical ethical principles, including the Nuremberg Code. You can't take away information and choice and have informed consent. So when they use the term anti-vax, it is the greatest psyop ever devised. There is no one that is anti-vax. There are a few abolitionists, and I even respect their cause, but I don't think it fully accounts for what we're saying, which is that we're sovereign. We should have a choice. That is the most basic human spiritual right. And therefore, the answer would be no, I'm not anti-vax because I don't consent to that psyop.
Now, how about you?
I'm not anti-vax. I'm anti-poison. And the problem is that what people don't realize is that these are added to vaccines to cause immune agitation. That immune agitator tells your immune system there's something here and you need to kill it. Now, most of the time it's going to be the dead virus. Sometimes it's going to be your own tissue. And the question I have is, we've seen a huge rise of epidemic of autoimmune conditions that happened at the same time that the vaccines have been increasing. And the question that I have is, are these related? This stuff needs to be investigated, and we need to have, research and scientists weigh in on this.
And be able to converse, be able to have these long-form discussions and not censor people. That's what we're fighting and standing for as truth seekers that believe in health freedom.
Exactly. Just asking that question today would be labeled as anti-vax, and that's the psychological operation. So what you're doing in asking a basic question that's so obvious is such a service, but in times of universal deceit. It's like a revolutionary act, right? That's where we're at today. We can't even speak to the simplest of questions any longer without that.
Yeah, stand for freedom of speech. Over and out.